I'm going to try and go through this a little bit more quickly. And I'm going to provide a little bit of the context on the tax side. So over the past 30 years, which is when I started studying economics, our economies have been ruled by supply-side trickle-down economic policies. These include, of course, deregulation, privatization, free trade, low interest rates, cuts to public spending, cuts to social services, and tax reform. This is all part of what was called the Washington Consensus, and countries around the world pursued these in agreement. On the tax side, it involved, in particular, cuts to business taxes and high-income taxes, and a shift to more consumption-based taxes. The argument was that these measures were supposed to increase savings and investment, thereby spurring economic growth. Benefits were supposed to trickle down through increased employment and higher wages. And we were supposed to believe this. But as Will Rogers once said, money doesn't trickle down, it trickles up. Give it to the people at the bottom, and the people at the top will have it before night. But at least it will have passed through the poor fellow's hands. So over the past, this chart shows tax rates for the bottom 10% on the left-hand side, for the middle-income groups in the middle, and for the top 1% on the right-hand side. As you can see on this, the top 1%, if you consider all taxes, income taxes, property taxes, sales taxes, payroll taxes, and other taxes, the top 1% actually pay the lowest rate of tax of all income groups. They now even pay a lower rate of tax than the bottom 10%. Lower income tax rates all around have also reduced revenues, shrinking the capacity for governments to provide public services. So this next chart shows the basis for these, oh, sorry, this is taking a little while to load here. Oh. This shows the composition of those taxes. The green area there is sales and commodity taxes. It falls much more heavily on lower income groups, but not all that much on the top. Then we have other taxes and user fees, also regressive, and property taxes. Payroll taxes, a higher incidence on middle income groups because more likely to be working. And it's income taxes and corporate taxes that are most progressive and that fall on higher income groups. So often we hear, and just a few days ago, Don Drummond and the C.D. Howe Institute were saying that high income groups already pay a much higher portion of income taxes than other groups. Well, they've forgotten about the other taxes. The tax system is a system, and the reason that you have progressive income taxes and also corporate taxes is so that it can be hopefully progressive all around, but so that the lower income groups, the middle income groups, don't pay a much higher share of their income in taxes than higher income groups. So over the past 30 years, there's been increased emphasis on value-added taxes, such as the HST. The introduction of the HST took about, I believe it was $4 billion off of the tax load of corporations and put it onto consumers. And there's a conscious reduction in high income tax rates and also corporate tax rates and business taxes. This is a chart of, there's been a big drop in the top income tax rate. Prior to 1970, the income tax rate on top incomes, the marginal rate, was over 80%. During the Carter Commission tax reform, it was reduced to approximately 60%. This is combined federal and provincial taxes. And the Carter Commission was a positive tax reform. But the other thing that the Carter Commission brought in was taxation of capital gains, so investment income. That hadn't been much taxed before that time. The aim of the Carter Commission was to tax income income from different sources at equal rates. So a line from it was a buck is a buck is a buck. The idea was that if you have income from different sources, it would be much more efficient for the economic system if it's taxed equally in different ways. Otherwise, you lead to a whole lot of tax avoidance and tax planning through that. But since then, the top income tax rate has been cut further. But as importantly as that, tax preferences and loopholes that are available to the highest income groups have also expanded. Income from capital gains and stock options are taxed at half the rate of normal working income. So if you work, you're taxed at a higher rate than if you don't work for the income. A lot of CEO income is provided in this form of compensation, stock options, investment income. And this is the main reason that people like Warren Buffett famously has said that he pays a lower rate of tax than his secretary and than the people who clean his office. Well, it's the same situation in Canada. We also have those lower rates of tax on stock options and capital gains. So on the corporate tax side, the argument was reductions in corporate tax rates would lead to an increase in investment. In fact, the absolute opposite has happened. Corporate income tax rates were 42% about a decade ago. Now they're reduced to 25%. Those lines should be going in opposite directions. It's exactly the opposite thing has happened. Business investment has declined in Canada and also in other countries that have reduced their corporate tax rates. Meanwhile, countries such as Canada, such as China and the United States, which have relatively high rates of corporate tax rates, have had fairly strong rates of investment. There's been an unprecedented shift towards record corporate surpluses and also record household deficits. There's a lot of talk about public deficits and the problems that they have, but the real problem, the real risk to the economy right now is record household deficits. Now, not all households have that. There's been an even greater inequality of wealth in Canada than income, but there's been an enormous shift in this way that's unprecedented since the 1960s. So just the last chart till I get to some of the results here. What I've done here is I've got the red line is the share of the share of national income of the top 1%. It's almost doubled in Canada since the 1980s. So the top 1% now takes home over 13% of national income. So that's more than 13 times the average. Meanwhile, economic growth has declined. So the lesson from this, and I'm presenting this because the arguments that we always get about fair taxes is that it's going to be bad for economic growth. Well, in fact, the experience over the past 2 or 3 decades has shown the opposite, that increasing inequality is bad for growth. And a lot of people are now saying from the IMF, OECD, elsewhere, have argue that it's increasing inequality that caused the financial crisis, and if we don't have greater rates of equality, we won't have sustainable economic growth. Our current government's direction of squeezing wages, which is what the federal government has done through the last budget, and cutting social public spending, which is going to reduce the social wage, is going to make it even worse. So what are a few, I like to group fair tax measures, a package of fair tax measures in three different areas. Fair taxes for corporations. If we restored the federal corporate income tax rate to 21%, it would raise about $10 billion. That's a conservative estimate. The budget from get this estimate for had it even higher than that. Financial activities tax or financial transaction taxes on trades in stocks and options and things like that would raise approximately $4 or $5 billion in Canada. The other thing that we need to do is tax high incomes at a higher rate. If you increase the tax rate for high incomes, for those making for incomes in excess of $250,000 to 35% from the 29% it is right now, it would raise about $3.5 billion. The other really important area that we need to move in is broadening the tax base and closing ineffective and regressive tax loopholes. So simply taxing capital gains, stock options at the same rate that normal income is taxed at would raise about $10 billion. So the total of that adds up to $29 billion. The federal deficit right now for this year is expected to be about $22 billion. So the lesson from this is that you could eliminate the deficit. Of course, it's not something that we want to do. It would be bad for the economy. But forestall the need for any cuts, but also provide funding for badly needed social programs with just a few of these tax measures. There are a lot of other tax measures that could raise a lot more money, but this is just an example of a few tax measures that could raise a significant amount of funds. Thank you.